Hello, my name is Jenny Lambden, and I am one of the school psychologists in the Office of Student Services. During this presentation, you will hear from me, as well as some other APS school psychologists, Catherine Mueller, Jennifer Phillip, and Samantha Silver. We will be talking about social and emotional learning, what it is, what it looks like across the developmental spectrum, and how students and teachers can facilitate and support social and emotional learning during this unprecedented time of instruction in a virtual environment. The Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, or CASEL, is a trusted source for knowledge about high-quality, evidence-based social and emotional learning, or SEL. CASEL supports educators and policy leaders and enhances the experiences and outcomes for all pre-K-12 students. CASEL defines SEL as the process through which children and adults understand and manage emotions, set and achieve positive goals, feel and show empathy for others, establish and maintain positive relationships, and make responsible decisions. We'll be referring to CASEL many times throughout this presentation. What does SEL look like in a classroom, school, or community? When referencing this graphic, we see the framework devised by CASEL. As you might expect, the most effective social and emotional learning requires a strategic, systemic approach that involves everyone, from school leaders to community partners to family members, working together to ensure students receive the support they need. Successful SEL is not a standalone program or an add-on. Rather, it is a framework that is central to how schools, communities, and families value and support the social, emotional, and academic development of their children. Research has shown that social and emotional development can be fostered, and social and emotional skills, attitudes, and behaviors can be taught and enhanced using a variety of approaches. For instance, this could include explicitly taught freestanding lessons that are designed to enhance students' social and emotional competence. These are the types of lessons students may receive from a school counselor during morning meeting or during their TA classes. Other approaches can involve teaching practices, such as cooperative learning or project-based learning, which both promote SEL, and integration of SEL and academic curriculum, such as language arts, math, social studies, or health. In addition, organizational strategies can promote SEL as a school-wide initiative that creates and cultivates a climate and culture conducive to learning. So, SEL is more than just a 30-minute lesson or canned curriculum or program. It is about how teaching and learning happen, as well as what is taught and where one learns. This systemic approach infuses social and emotional learning into every part of a student's daily life. And in line with the systemic approach, it also includes the support of families and community members to teach and reinforce these competencies when students return to their homes and communities. SEL is a deeply ingrained part of the way students and adults interact both in the classroom and out of it. Creating and incorporating SEL across settings helps to ensure that students are afforded the best learning environments that are intentional, equitable, supportive, and welcoming. Social and emotional learning enhances students' capacity to deal effectively and ethically with daily tasks and challenges. Similar to other SEL frameworks, CASEL's integrated framework promotes intrapersonal, interpersonal, and cognitive competence. As you saw in the previous slide, CASEL's framework identifies 5 core competencies that can be taught in many ways across many settings. These include self-awareness and self-management, social awareness and relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. In addition to teaching these competencies, many educators and researchers are also exploring how best to assess them. As we continue to learn more about social and emotional learning, I'm going to share a bit about each of the core SEL competencies. Please note that I will be sharing a brief overview of each competency. For more information about these competencies, video links are embedded into the presentation for you to view at a later time. Self-awareness. Self-awareness is the ability to accurately recognize one's own emotions, thoughts, and values, and how they influence behavior. It's the ability to accurately assess one's strengths and limitations with a well-grounded sense of confidence, optimism, and a growth mindset. Parents can help children develop self-awareness by being honest about their own emotions. Educators can help by teaching the vocabulary of emotions, modeling behavior, and supporting students as they grow in self-awareness. Self-management is the ability to successfully regulate one's emotions, thoughts, and behaviors in different situations, effectively managing stress, controlling impulses, and motivating oneself. It's the ability to set and work towards personal and academic goals. Students can learn to manage their feelings and turn them into positive actions. Adults can help by creating a calm and regulated environment, showing how to manage impulses and discussing ways to resolve conflicts. Social awareness is the ability to take the perspective of and empathize with others, including those from diverse backgrounds and cultures. The ability to understand social and ethical norms for behavior and to recognize family, school, and community resources and supports. Children can develop social awareness and learn empathy by putting themselves in another's shoes. Tips for parents include helping children to recognize emotions, appreciate diversity, and show respect for others. Relationship skills involves the ability to establish and maintain healthy and rewarding relationships with diverse individuals and groups. It's the ability to communicate clearly, listen well, cooperate with others, resist inappropriate social pressure, negotiate conflict constructively, and seek and offer help when needed. Communication, cooperation, and the ability to successfully resolve conflicts are key to successful relationships. Educators can help students develop these skills by working together in groups and discussing roles. Parents can support their children by spending time with them and encouraging communication. Responsible decision-making is the ability to make constructive choices about personal behavior and social interactions based on ethical standards, safety concerns, and social norms. The realistic evaluation of consequences of various actions and a consideration for the well-being of oneself and others. Children can make responsible decisions by developing the ability to analyze a situation, understand its ethical implications, and evaluate the consequences. Parents and educators can help students learn to think through all parts of a problem and encourage them to make decisions on their own. If you notice, there are video links for each of these different core competency areas. These videos were produced in partnership with CASEL and the Montgomery County Educational Service Center. I recommend you checking them out. More than 2 decades of research demonstrates that education promoting social and emotional learning gets results. The findings come from multiple fields and sources, including student achievement, neuroscience, health, employment, psychology, classroom management, learning theory, economics, and the prevention of youth problem behaviors. SEL helps students grow and develop in the core competency areas I just mentioned, but social and emotional learning is also linked to other positive outcomes and student gains. These include improved attitudes about self, others, and school, positive classroom behavior. SEL is not primarily a behavior management solution, which is a common misperception. Rather, it promotes the development of important social emotional competencies which can facilitate positive behaviors in the classroom. Research also shows that there's an 11 percentile point gain on academics. This is a significant data point in that it helps individuals understand that SEL is not, it doesn't just include soft skills or nice to haves. Rather, these are skills that are critically important. Other outcomes include reductions in conduct problems and reductions in emotional distress. Right now, we're living in a time when emotional distress, depression, anxiety, and suicide are at an all-time high. Understanding that SEL can have an impact here is important, but I should mention a word of caution. SEL should not be viewed as a sole solution for mental illness or mental health concerns. Parents and students should work collaboratively with their mental health providers, medical professionals, and school supports to accommodate and support students' needs at school. Additionally, adults benefit from SEL as well. Research even shows that teachers who possess strong competencies in SEL are able to work more effectively with challenging students. In a more recent study from McGraw-Hill that was released in 2018, their findings, representing a national sample of over 1,100 teachers, administrators, and parents, agreed that SEL is crucial. Both administrators, teachers, and parents believe that SEL is just as important as academic learning, and teachers and administrators supported the notion that teaching SEL skills in the classroom is most important for improving negative student behaviors such as bullying, and according to parents, SEL improves school safety. Therefore, in a nutshell, SEL increases academic achievement, improves behavior, for instance, dropout rates, classroom and school behavior issues, addresses mental health concerns, and shows improved outcomes during adulthood. As you would likely surmise, the development of SEL skills do not look the same for every student, and naturally, competencies look different across the different developmental areas. A developmental lens not only focuses on what changes, but also on what stays the same. In terms of change, children's development is marked by the changing importance of developmental tasks. It is necessary to note the importance of teaching these skills at the student's developmental level before building upon those skills. Thus, a child's functioning now and later is impacted by success or failure on earlier developmental tasks. In SEL, the content of specific skills differs along with changing developmental tasks as children mature. But the dimensions of what is important remain surprisingly constant. An example is the overarching developmental task of self-awareness. This never disappears as a key component of SEL, but it morphs into increasingly sophisticated age-specific tasks. As we continue this presentation, we will discuss various SEL skill sets across the developmental spectrum, from preschool to adolescence.
Catherine, I think you might be muted.
There we go. So by the next couple of slides, we're going to go through the social emotional skills that are expected at certain ages using the CASEL framework. It's important to recognize that all children develop at their own rate, so while there may be general expectations of skills that children should be displaying by certain ages, children will differ in the rate that they achieve those expectations. Throughout the preschool years, children are gradually increasing the range of words that they can use to express their feelings. Between 4 and 5, preschoolers are continuing to work on managing their emotions, but still often require support from adults. Preschoolers also start to grow in their understanding of their own likes and dislikes, as well as their own strengths and weaknesses. Preschoolers also start to grow in their ability to recognize the feelings of others based on nonverbal cues or facial expressions, and they begin to show foundational understanding of the idea that others may have a perspective that is different from their own. They begin to initiate prosocial behaviors and interactions, and their play progresses from mostly parallel play at age 2 to more cooperative play that requires communicating, sharing, and turn-taking between the ages of 4 and 5. And because they're starting to engage in more cooperative play, they're also engaging in early efforts to solve interpersonal problems, but often still requiring that adult support for those types of conflicts.
When children transition to elementary grades, they should begin to develop dyadic or one-on-one friendships that are stable in nature. At this age, children will also begin to understand their impulses as well as develop techniques for managing these impulses. Similarly, children will start to demonstrate more overall emotional regulation within their friendships and peer groups. While children start to learn more about their emotions and how to regulate them, they will continue to develop their ability to recognize these emotions in others as well across situations and settings. Finally, in elementary school, children will develop their social problem-solving skills.
So as students approach the secondary level, our goal is to really help them build upon those foundational skills that they've already developed. So we really want to help them understand more complex emotions, learn independence, and build their identity within themselves and within groups. In middle school, we start to see that students are just beginning to navigate those more complex emotions that we had discussed earlier. So for example, students might learn more than just identifying one mood. Instead, they might realize that they have more than one feeling. So an example is starting the school year, they might realize that they're really happy to return to school, but also nervous as well. So it's building more complex emotions and recognizing that they can feel more than one feeling at once. And also they start to really form a lot of group identities away from their parents. We know that a lot of students are starting to learn independence from parents, and students are craving that independence from adults. So in middle school, that's when students really start to build their identity within peer groups. As we transition to high school, students build upon their skills to develop their personal identity within groups and apart from groups as well. So they're really focusing on building their own identity. So they'll continue to gain independence from adults and start to focus on building more mature relationships with peers. Students also start to understand other people's emotional perspectives. And then students will start to explore and articulate their ethical beliefs in order to navigate their behaviors and their decision making, so that way it matches what they believe. And I believe you might be muted, Catherine.
Okay. So what Tier 1 SEL resources are used in APS? In APS, there are Tier 1s of social emotional supports that are available to all students. So all students in all grades will have access to Mental Health Awareness Month activities in the month of May that their schools may be offering. Elementary schools use the Second Step and Mind Up curriculums school-wide through the monthly counseling lessons. Middle school uses the Second Step curriculum and the Signs of Suicide curriculum, and then high school uses community circles, Signs of Suicide, Sources of Strength, and the Stress Less, Laugh More campaign. Each school also provides Tier 2 supports for those students who may not be as readily gaining the developmentally appropriate social emotional skills, and they may require more direct small group or individual instruction. These supports may differ slightly between schools in terms of what programs are used, but some of the same curriculums are used across several schools. So you might see curriculums like the zones of regulation, social thinking, or coping CAT being used in your school for more of those Tier 2 or Tier 3 supports. The APS Social Emotional Learning Reference Guide, there's an embedded link that contains more information and really outlines all of the social emotional supports that are available in APS. Who can you contact to discuss SEL at your child's school? So there's several people available at your child's school who can discuss SEL supports with you. The school counselor, the HILT counselor, the school psychologists and the school social workers, and of course your child's teacher and the school administrator. All of those people will be able to give recommendations on how to support the skills, the SEL skills that your child's learning at school in the home environment. While both home and school have a role, home is the center for teaching life skills. It's commonly said that parents are their child's first teacher. So this graphic shows what parents rate as some of the most important life skills that they feel that their children need. As you can see, respect is the most highly rated, followed by self-esteem and self-confidence, and then so forth from there. As we discussed, there are several embedded links in some of the slides. So this slide contains an embedded link to a video that was created by Castle and Chicago Public Schools for parents on social emotional learning. It goes through the Castle competencies, as we've done, and it also provides insights for parents and how they can incorporate SEL into their own parenting practices. The video discusses the importance of the homeschool connection and continuously having that parent involvement in the child's school. Over the next couple of slides, we're going to provide some suggestions on how parents specifically might be able to support the various SEL skills based on their child's age. We found that several of the recommendations are important across all ages. So for all kids, a strong parent-child relationship is really built on trust, security, and love. It's important for families, for children of all ages, to have clear expectations, boundaries, and family values that are consistently communicated within the family. Being an active listener is important for children of all ages, so reflecting and validating your child's feelings. When we say reflecting, really being able to show that you're listening and that you're hearing what your child is saying. So it might be something like, it sounds like you might feel frustrated, is that right? And then for validating, we're talking about really showing that you understand why they might be feeling that feeling. So that makes sense, I get that. And then, of course, as we know, during this unprecedented time, that predictability is really important, and that when we don't know what to expect, it increases our anxiety level. So as much as possible, providing structure and consistency in the home setting really helps children to feel safe at home. And then one of the big things is that as parents, we have to model the behaviors that we see. So children are really always watching the adults in their lives to figure out the best strategies to use for their own problems that may come up. So if as adults we're modeling strong stress management strategies, they're going to be more apt to employ those strategies themselves. And then across all age groups, books can be a really helpful means of discussing social emotional topics. Sometimes it's easier to have a conversation about how characters might be feeling and how one's actions might impact the feelings of others through having those conversations within a book, and that can be applicable from preschool through high school. Specific to preschool, when we think about what's also developmentally appropriate for them, modeling is an important thing for preschoolers. So modeling our own feelings. So I felt frustrated when, and then also regulating how we're managing our own emotions. So if it's the coffee maker broke and I felt frustrated when the coffee maker wasn't working, but then I took a deep breath and I thought about it and I was able to figure it out. So then we're showing the child that we had that feeling, we managed it, and we problem solved it. It's also important while children are still building their emotional vocabulary to be naming and validating your child's emotions. So, for example, you look frustrated because you have to stop playing with your toys and you really love those toys. And then being able to shift to kind of the direction that you might want them to go in. Reading books about feelings, there's tons of books out there. There's 2 here on the slides. but they really expose children to those different emotional vocabulary terms, and they give more depth and description of what they might feel like, what they might look like. And then it can also be helpful at home to use feelings visuals, like the one that's on the slide, where it gives a vocabulary term, but also provides a picture of what that feeling might look like. And sometimes it can be easier for kids to point to that feeling, particularly when they're emotionally dysregulated. So it can be helpful to have those available in the home. For all kids, as we talked about, it's important to have clear and consistent routines. And for preschoolers, it can be helpful to have visuals that outline those routines so that the preschoolers can see the steps of the routine, and it also can allow for more independence if they can follow through with the routine on their own because they're not relying on parent reminders. And then also providing clear and concise directions. So for example, if you want your child to clean up, rather than saying clean up, saying something like put the blocks in the basket. So you're giving them very clear directions of how you want the task accomplished, and they're learning that for future tasks that they might do independently. Additionally, when we're thinking about preschoolers, it's important to start those foundational skills of teaching and practicing calming strategies. So for young kids, it can be something like blowing bubbles to really practice taking those deep belly breaths. It can be something like watching Elmo on Sesame Street on videos about belly breathing. There are apps like Breathe, Think, Do, where the child can practice helping the monster to take deep breaths to calm down. Doing yoga together, where the breath is such a focus of that skill, can be helpful for teaching them some of those calming strategies. And then also doing some of those foundational mindfulness tasks or activities. So for example, you can do a mindful walk with your child, and maybe when you're walking, you're focusing on the sounds that you hear, or you're looking for objects of a certain color, and it's really teaching that child that skill of being present in the moment. And that skill will become really important for them in terms of coping strategies as they get older. It can also be important to create a calm down area in the home that provides various tools to assist with regulating emotions. So it can be nice to set up a cute kind of cozy area with blankets, stuffed animals, pillows, other tools like coloring or putty. There's also glitter jars that focus on taking the deep breaths. So this isn't intended to be a punitive area, but rather an area that the child can go to calm down when they might be dysregulated. It's also important for children of all ages, but particularly for preschoolers, allowing for those age-appropriate choices when possible. So it might be something as simple as you can have peas or broccoli for dinner. Which one would you like? So you know that you want them to have a vegetable, but they're getting a choice in what vegetable that they have. Also important is modeling conflict resolution. This won't always be possible, but when there are moments where you can collaboratively problem solve together, that process can be very valuable. So it can be something where you find something that you've noticed is difficult and ask your child for suggestions on how you might be able to make it easier or be able to help with that problem. And then listing and generating several solutions and making sure to incorporate all the solutions that your child comes up with as well. And then going through together and discussing how those solutions may or may not work, and then collaboratively deciding on what solutions you think will work, and then being willing to try those out and come back to the table if they aren't working, and then re-brainstorm to find a new solution. That process is really valuable for kids to learn and to go through with an adult together. And then in terms of relationship skills, continually asking questions about friendships. So who did they play with today? What did they do? How did they feel when their friend shared that toy with them? And then, of course, scheduling play dates. For some children, it can be helpful to provide more structured activities versus some more open-ended activity. And then for some children, it can be helpful to start with one preferred peer and to slowly build up to more peers rather than starting in a group setting. But keeping those consistent play dates can be a great way for them to practice those relationship skills.
So as kids transition to early elementary school, you'll notice that some of these strategies may be similar, but built upon a little bit as kids advance. Of course, continuing with reading books about emotions, self-regulation, and friendship and social skills continues to be important. There are so many reading lists that suggest books by specific SEL skill, like empathy or decision making, perspective taking. And there is a link at the end of this presentation for an example of the second step reading list that includes some of these books by developmental level. Watching shows or movies together, practicing empathy and perspective taking, continuing to model and engage in calming activities together. Maybe your child can see you taking what we call a brain break or having a reset period. Younger children do co-regulate with trusted adults, and older children feed off our internal states. So during this time, it's important to take care of ourselves and model that own self-care to our kids. Teaching children the value of kindness, engaging in gratitude exercises together. A popular example of a gratitude exercise is making a gratitude jar where you decorate some kind of jar and personalize it and write down something every day that you're grateful for. And over time, you just have an abundance of examples of things you're grateful for in your life. Support your child to overcome challenges independently. Model problem-solving language, such as, I think you can do this. What could you change or do differently? Talk to your child about resilience and perseverance. For example, I know bike riding was hard, but if we keep trying, we'll get better at it. I'm proud of you for trying something hard. It's important to praise this effort and perseverance when you observe it. Encouraging growth mindset language. For example, I don't know how to do this yet. Growth mindset language fosters the idea that if an individual believes they can improve, they will. The addition of this yet also is powerful for students because it implies they are not finished learning and they can eventually reach their goal. Ask your child open-ended questions about their friendships. For example, what qualities do they look for in a friend? And continue to promote decision-making by allowing children choices, similar to what we heard before. Do you want to do your homework first or have a snack and then do your homework is an example for a choice we might see for early elementary. For upper elementary, we're going to start using different words to describe our own emotions around our child, point out complex emotions in books or TV. For example, we might start to point out the idea of mixed emotions and the idea that there is no such thing as a feeling being bad. All feelings are important. Model self-regulation, talk about the coping skills you are using. When children see us being messy, dealing with our own messy feelings and how we deal with them, it does give them permission to do the same. They may not have all the skills yet to manage them, and that's okay. What's important is that they see that everyone can feel bad, and sometimes they have opportunities to learn from how we deal with them. Continue to discuss stress management strategies, such as making lists, breaking down tasks, seeking help, deep breathing. Engage in these stress-reducing activities together. Maybe do yoga, go for a walk or run. And if your child is interested, journaling is a great way to get children to start to express their feelings. Continue that growth mindset language. This will be important really as kids go through all the grades. Read books about resisting peer pressure, talk through problems, logistical consequences, and resolutions. Praise positive decisions that your child makes. If you can, ask your child to help around the house, possibly folding laundry, laying the table. And then there's the idea of the sandwich technique, which is about providing feedback for others. So you can teach the sandwich technique to your kids, but it's also a helpful technique to use when correcting behavior. This method starts with praise, and it's important that this praise is specific. For example, I love how you helped your sister today. And it moves into stating your opinion in a constructive way, such as, can you explain why you did this? Let's figure it out together. This method also lends itself to practicing problem-solving skills. Finally, include the child in the discussion again by asking what they think about what happened, and end by emphasizing you are coming from a place of love and care. These are just a few visuals to demonstrate some of the recommendations on the previous slides. This first visual is an example of growth mindset language that shows how we can really turn what we call a fixed mindset into a more flexible one, or a growth mindset. So for example, instead of saying, I give up, which is a very fixed statement, encouraging the child to say something like, I'll just use a different strategy. There are also so many visuals out there that help kids with guided breathing, such as this figure 8. There's also breathing visuals for what we call balloon breathing, star breathing, hot cocoa breathing. So every child may gravitate towards a different visual and find what works for them. And then this get grounded visual helps kids regulate themselves when they've become escalated. It asks them to point out 5 things they can see, 4 things they can touch, 3 things they can hear, 2 things they can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. So the name of the visual is appropriate. It helps kids with grounding themselves when they're escalated.
And then once we reach that secondary level of middle school and high school, we really start to prioritize the student's ability to navigate through situations themselves. So our goal is to facilitate and slowly provide scaffolded supports so our students can learn how to navigate situations with reduced adult support. So that way they can really navigate them themselves. So really the first priority is to look for opportunities to just listen to your student. Actively listen, ask questions, and try not to offer immediate solutions, and really allow your student to talk through those problems themselves. So maybe if your daughter is struggling with a friendship with a peer and she said, I got into a huge fight with my best friend, what do I do? Instead of offering our gut reaction of just giving her a list of solutions, maybe start by asking, okay, so what was the situation? Why don't you create a list of solutions that you think could be plausible? Maybe ask her what the pros and cons are of each and ask her to choose a solution that she thinks is best. That way you're still facilitating that conversation and you're listening, you're validating her concerns, and she's learning to navigate that peer situation with your support, but she's really gaining those skills for herself. Another great strategy is just to provide daily interactions around your teen's emotions, even if it's just a quick, how are you feeling right now? And quickly tell me why. A lot of the times I think our students forget that just being able to express how they're feeling is crucial in developing and maintaining these foundational skills. Another great strategy is also modeling self-awareness. So a lot of the times our students learn best from seeing how we're reacting to situations, and they really feed off of this modeling technique. So if you're feeling stressed, sometimes it might be appropriate to say, I'm feeling very overwhelmed because of this. That way your student understands that it's okay and it's valid to express how you're feeling within the home setting. And it also builds that trust between you and your student, and it really maintains it and fosters that encouraged support. Another really great thing is to just encourage your child to explore their interests and strengths. When it comes to middle school and high school, we really want to increase a student's self-awareness and their ability to navigate what they're interested in, because in middle school, that starts to help them find friendships that match their interests. And when it comes to high school, it helps them start to think about their future and what careers they might want to pursue based on their strengths, what they're good at, and what they're interested in. We also want to make sure that we're encouraging students to continue that self-talk that really focuses on growth and those growing opportunities. And then something I wanted to mention too is a lot of the times we know that students might not always want to come to us with their problems and wanting to talk to us about situations. And that's okay. That's valid. It happens to everyone. But make sure your child just has someone else that they can turn to. So sometimes if a student's really invested in sports, make sure they have a trusted coach that they can talk to, or a family friend, maybe a close aunt that they feel like they can confide in if they're feeling overwhelmed and need to express how they're feeling to someone. And then lastly, and I feel like we can all agree this is pretty important, encourage brief physical activity each day, especially right now. I think a lot of students are having so much heavy screen time that it's important just to build in some type of routine each day for brief physical activity, even if it's 5 minutes of a quick stretch between activities or schooling or whatever you're doing. So that way it can foster that natural stress management strategy. Another idea is to just set clear expectations and boundaries for your student. I think that we're all setting new rules at home. We have new routines that we're setting, and it's important to tell your student, if they have to stay at home, if they have certain boundaries that they need to follow, be really transparent, especially with secondary, about why these rules are being created and what the natural consequences will be. So that way they understand why something's happening and they can use that information for their responsible decision making. And another option as well is if they do break those rules and if they have a consequence that they have to just make sure that it's important to discuss that mistake with your student, validate that it's a learning moment, and take advantage of that learning moment. If they break the rules, maybe talk about, that self-talk again of what happened, what could you have done differently, so that way they can start to navigate and problem solve. And you're facilitating that, but they're really taking the lead and learning from their mistakes and hopefully successes as well. Again, facilitate conversations around peers, especially when we reach that secondary level. We really want to make sure that your students are able to identify a core group of friends that match their interests, match their beliefs, and that they can get along with and have those positive peer relationships with. It's really important to also have conversations around peer pressure and responsible online behavior. So, for example, being responsible with real friends versus online friends. In this new virtual world, we really want to make sure that students are able to navigate those situations and be able to talk with you, their parents, about what's going on with building friendships that are really positive at home. And then lastly, just talk to your students about what it means to be a responsible and collaborative person. Again, those social emotional skills really become more complex as they grow in their age. So at home, a responsible behavior can be as simple as just doing weekly chores and building that into their routine. And then when talking about collaborative behaviors, a really great thing that I know a lot of teachers do with their students and counselors, and at home it's great, is to ask the students, who's your role model? Who's someone you look up to? If they love Steph Curry, if they love some kind of sports person, clearly I'm not sporty, but if they love someone, then you can say, okay, well, they work on a team. That's because of their collaborative behaviors. So what do they do specifically that makes them a role model to you? And that can be really helpful for students to look at someone that they idolize or someone they respect and how those behaviors match who they want to be. That way it's not just you saying, okay, you have to do these behaviors, and they actually have some investment in the process as well. And then on the next page, it's really just talking about, as students develop, especially in the current climate, talk about being open-minded with your students. Everyone has different experiences, backgrounds, customs, opinions. People have a lot of different experiences, and it's important to teach your student to respect those experiences, respect those different beliefs, and really honor what other people are feeling. Again, the purpose of social emotional learning is to also validate how you're feeling and validate how other people are feeling, and understanding different perspectives other than your own. So talk about bullying and make sure that your student understands that there are some things they can say, some things they shouldn't say, and how to also advocate for their peers and understand how someone else might be feeling. And then lastly, let your child know it's okay to ask for help. especially when it comes to mental health because of the stigma surrounding it. And as we had talked about before, if you're modeling that yourself and you're expressing if you're struggling, if you might need something, that really helps create that open level of communication between you and your student, that it's okay to express if they're struggling, if they need help, or if they're doing well.
So the return to school this year will be unlike any other in our history and will be emotionally charged for students and adults. This moment will call on all members of our school communities to deepen our social and emotional competencies and create equitable learning environments where all students and adults process, heal, thrive. CASEL's 5 core social and emotional competencies situated within the context of classrooms, schools, and communities may be familiar to many educators, but these will take on deeper significance as we navigate a very different type of schooling. So we define some of the different competency areas. And so in thinking about these competency areas, there are skills we know that we need now during this new time we're in. So in thinking about self-awareness, as we process the current pandemic and racial injustices, self-awareness is critical to identifying and processing all of our complex emotions, especially as things are uncertain, socially turbulent. It's important that we reflect on our strengths, understand our own cultural, racial, and social identities, and examine our implicit biases. For self-management, it's even more important now that we, as we cope with different types of grief and loss, that we develop resiliency and express our agency through resisting injustices and practicing anti-racism. Social awareness allows us to understand the different broader historical and social contexts around the inequities that are exacerbated by COVID-19 and all of the ongoing individual and institutional impacts of systemic racism. With regard to relationship skills, these are essential right now to help us build and maintain meaningful connections across race, culture, age, distance. We do need to support one another during this time of grief and struggle and help each other collaboratively find solutions to new obstacles that we're all facing. In terms of responsible decision making, this is particularly important as we analyze the consequences of our individual and institutional actions on other people's health, safety, and help support each other as we're all making decisions that promote collective well-being and engage in collective action to form just a society that's more just and equitable. This information is brought from the Reunite, Renew, and Thrive Return to School roadmap for reopening schools, and it has tons of great information that is really valuable in the times that we're living in right now.
And then we just have a list of general recommendations for coping with the current situation and coping with this new COVID lifestyle that none of us really expected to need at this time. So during COVID, it's really important, and I think we have mentioned it, to really validate your child's feelings and empower their ability to problem solve and cope with the current situation. So I think that there are a lot of different resources that we've included as well for ways that students can cope and problem solve. And again, you're there to really help and support them in this time, but also to empower them to make those decisions and figure out what works for them with coping and really facilitating those conversations. So one option is just creating a visual depiction with your child, exploring like different ways that they can cope and take care of themselves. There are a lot of different ideas. As we talked about with preschool and elementary age students, it's really great to have those visuals. There's a great option called a wheel of choice, which looks like a wheel of Jeopardy almost, or a wheel of fortune. And you get to have your student write down different coping strategies, like take a walk, take a break, color, blow bubbles. They can decorate it, and when they get stressed, they go and point at their wheel at what they need to do. And that way they have a constant list of strategies to use every day if they're feeling stressed or overwhelmed. Also, another great idea is to also just have a calm down section, a calm down room or area within the household for your students. And it doesn't have to be, I think, like Catherine said, it's not punitive. It's really just a safe space for them. And this works not just for preschool, but also for middle school, high schoolers, a small area where they can sit down and they have a safe space to calm down. If it's just to refocus, if they're frustrated with their sibling, or if they just need 5 minutes away from life, that's okay. And with those calm down areas, there are a lot of different things you can put. We always recommend using it based on your child's interests. So some students, they really like having bubbles to calm down, to practice that deep breathing. With some of my older students, I know that they love using journals, and they just need a journal and maybe mindfulness coloring pages that they can use to color with, or maybe just express how they're feeling. Other students want like music or something that they can listen to music for 5 minutes. It's something where they have the choice of their coping strategies, and it's just a safe space in the house to use. We do encourage that your child takes breaks again every day from social media, whether it's going outside, spending time with family, and hopefully spending time with friends. So as a reminder, really encourage your students to maintain those relationships with their friends during this tough time, even if it's having a core group of friends that they're reaching out to. So that way they can maintain those positive peer relationships. And also it's good for peers to know that their feelings are validated and that they're not alone in going through this situation. So they have family and they have others outside of the house as well. Especially with older students, incorporate a lot of different mindfulness techniques into their daily routine. A lot of students feel like they don't need deep breathing or they don't need these mindfulness techniques, but it's really helpful just every day. For some students, maybe having 10 minutes of yoga to start off the day, or using a 5-minute mindfulness app, like the Stop, Breathe, and Think. And we have another list of apps that students can use that are free that they can incorporate. Or again, mindful coloring together. And we have a whole list of stress supports for teenagers that's age appropriate for them. And again, building mindfulness and stress relief routines into any age student is really helpful. Not just because they get to build those skills to practice, but also it's really helpful to create a new and predictable routine for your student to reduce anxiety and uncertainty in these times. And lastly, just offer ways that your kids can contribute if they feel like they want to help. Sometimes drawing pictures or making cards to mail people can be really encouraging. And again, give them a sense of control in the situation that they might feel like they're lacking that control. And it really helps empower your students. And then on the next slide is just a list of examples again. The wheel of choice. There is a link embedded as well within these slides if you want to look at examples. There's an example of a calm down room, and it looks like that's for some of the younger students. If you want any examples for any older students as well, there are a lot of different options online and ideas that you can use. You can always feel free to reach out to your school-based counselor or counseling office, school psychologist, school social worker if you're looking for ideas that are age appropriate for your student. That's just the name, Stop, Breathe, Think, of one of the apps that we use with a lot of our students that can just give them a few short strategies to refocus and recalibrate their emotions in that moment. And lastly, it's just a picture of a whole list of coping strategies for students. Again, this is more visual for some of the younger students, which is really helpful for those younger students to have the visuals. Like Catherine said, if they're feeling overwhelmed, sometimes they can't say how they're feeling and they need to point. And that's a really great option to have those visuals. And for the older students, empowering them to write down the options that they want and they can have a list to choose from. But we do recommend a lot of the times it's good to have a list that they've created on hand. So if they're stressed out, you can give them the list, walk away, and they can have that power to choose for themselves what they want to do.
So, in continuing with just having social relationships and building those relationships outside of the home, we know that a trusting relationship is just a very integral part of students' social and emotional learning. And during this time, it is so important that we continue to foster relationships and strengthen old ones so that we can elevate students' growth and development. It's also important that we are intentional in allowing our children and students the opportunity to just have space for creating those peer relationships by weaving those interactions throughout the school day. It could be through the morning meetings, partner work, small group work, within the different tiered systems of support that are available to students at all levels. As we navigate this virtual world, you might notice that teachers and school staff are just being a lot more intentional in how they integrate and embed various SEL practices into academics. This could be through a welcoming ritual or greeting, by incorporating different types of engagement strategies within the online learning environment, and just offering that optimistic closing to the school day. Because of this, it's so important that we as a community help students, families, and staff to build and strengthen their relationships and support systems, maintaining regular check-ins and placing an emphasis on trauma-informed practices, and just knowing that social emotional learning and academic development should be in tandem with one another, and not in competition with one another. Finally, we know that academic rigor is important to student success, but as I just mentioned, incorporating social and emotional learning is also integral to student success, because it underlies everything in a person's life, from being resilient to managing anger, handling conflict, dealing with others, being ethically responsible, and solving problems. These core SEL competencies, when they're prioritized, can help students better understand themselves, understand how to work well with others, increase responsibility and decision-making skills, and just navigate the world in a more effective way. Please refer to these additional resources if you wish to learn more about how to support your child's development of SEL skills at home. And then there are even more resources for supporting SEL in the home environment. Thank you so much for spending this time with us. If you have any additional questions or comments related to APS's incorporation of SEL or this presentation, please submit them to engage@apsva.us. In addition, we've provided contact information for the APS Parent Resource Center, or PRC, which is coordinated by the wonderful Kathleen Donovan and the amazing Kelly Mountain. Thanks again for spending this time with us, and be well.